Welcome,
Beautiful.
everyone. This is our third in our communication series for the VIP Professional Development Program. And we're so excited to have Meg Allen here to present about professional business communication, which is a really important and sometimes overlooked skill. So we are going to be getting some great information from Meg today, and I'll turn it over to you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Great to be in this virtual space with you all this evening. I want to start by thanking you all for your time and for choosing to spend part of your Tuesday evening developing your professional skills. This is, as Wendy mentioned, we're part of the soft launch of a broader professional development program here at Minds. And towards the end of the presentation, I would really welcome your input and your feedback on how I could make this presentation even stronger for future years. So just keep that tucked in the back of your mind. My hope for this, for our next about hour or so together, is to really have a generative and helpful conversation. As Wendy mentioned, I'm a firm believer that particularly in our increasingly digital world, email communication skills are just absolutely vital. They can be dismissed, but when so much happens over Teams, over email, over chat, it's really important to start paying attention to that. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Give me the heads up if it's looking good to all of you. Everyone can see? Great. Excellent. Well, let's dive in. A little bit of a cheeky title here. I can't resist a little cheeky title. But we're going to talk a lot about the nuts and bolts of really effective emails. My apologies. We'll go here. How do I advance a slide here? There we go. Here's a quick overview of what I hope we can accomplish together this evening. As we're a small group, I'd love to do quick introductions. If you're in a place where you can't verbally introduce yourself, please feel free to use the chat. We'll talk about why even bother spending time talking about emails as part of that why netiquette section. And then I'll introduce this 6-sided framework that I've found personally really helpful when crafting emails. It's something that I taught when I was working for a nonprofit workforce development organization in the Boston area. And it seems like it's really useful for folks. So happy to share it with all of you. Then we'll dive into some practice. And then again, any feedback that you have, questions, parting thoughts to wrap up. Well, with that, let's dive into talking about why we should even spend time thinking about how to craft effective emails. Again, would love to hear your thoughts. Why spend an hour out of your Tuesday afternoon thinking about the art of the email and the art of communication via Outlook or Gmail? Curious to hear any people's thoughts. Feel free to pop them in the chat, popcorn them out. I have a whole list of thoughts on it, but wanted to hear yours first before diving in.
I always heard that emails, regardless of intent, are always read negatively by the recipient. So managing how you word certain phrases, especially professionally, could be very helpful.
Absolutely. I think there's a real human tendency to read tone into email, and there's a lot of relationship management that occurs when our emails capture or fail to capture tone. Thank you for that. Building off of that comment, this is kind of a cheeky image here, but again, grammar the use or sometimes improper use of grammar conveys radically different messages. And we'll talk about this later in the 6-step framework, but just proofreading your email and making sure that you don't have a situation where you can read multiple messages into a simple sentence on eats, shoots, and leaves, just based on comma use, something that's so subtle and so fine, but so important. Kind of to what we were speaking about with tone. If I sent this email to Jake, if you don't email me the report by 1 p.m., we will miss our deadline, send ASAP. Those words communicate a certain emotional atmosphere. You know, if I am Jake receiving that email message, I would assume a lot of things about my relationship with Meg, even if that wasn't Meg's intention in sending the email. Conversely, this message conveys the same content, but is delivered in a way where Jake, as the recipient, has a radically different understanding of his relationship with Meg, his expectations with Meg. It sets a whole different kind of psychological climate in Jake's head. And that's really important. If Jake and Meg are working together on a day-to-day basis, heck, even on a monthly basis, how we articulate our asks and our requests, and maybe sometimes those missed expectations over email, has a huge impact on our relationships with our coworkers, our colleagues, even people outside of our organizations. I share a cover of this book because I'm actually auditing a class here at Minds within the McBride Honors Program. And we started our class by reading this book about the Flint water crisis. And in digging through the footnotes, because I love some good footnotes, I came across this really juicy footnote that you can read on your own time, but essentially talks about how emails within and to members of the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, were fundamental in the ultimate court filing against for Burgess versus the United States of America. A pretty powerful illustration of something called the Freedom of Information Act, which basically means that an email written or received in connection with the transaction of public business is a public record. And because it's a public record, it can be requested by any member of the public to view and subsequently analyze. Public businesses encompass more than we think. It's government offices, but it's also public schools. It's public universities, it's municipalities, it's offices like the Bureau of Land Management. So again, when we think about why pay attention to emails, this legal framework in place means that your email exchanges, particularly with government clients, are part of, or can be accessed by the broader public. And because of that, they deserve scrutiny and deserve time and attention and kind of a pause before you send emails to think about, okay, how would I feel if this was suddenly viewable to states across the country, just as it was in the EPA filing in Flint as part of the water crisis. So a good rule of thumb that we'll talk about a little later, but is to treat all of your online communications as public documents. And particularly if you're working for a government client, working with a government client, or heck, if you're part of a government agency and a public business as well. So kind of, again, why bother? Why bother with thinking about this? More and more communication is happening over email and Teams. So that grammar that we talked about with eats, shoots, and leaves matters a lot. And it's just part of our day-to-day life now. The absence of nonverbal cues over email can frequently lead to misinterpretation. You can have a situation with Jake and Meg, where Meg's message may not have been, kind of rough and tumble, but because there weren't nonverbal cues to kind of articulate the real tone behind it, Jake misinterpreted it. Online communication can be public information, really important to keep in mind. And then maybe the most important thing, volume and efficiency. As you all think about entering the workforce, you're going to be confronted with your own stack of emails, and then communicating frequently with managers and superiors who are sifting through hundreds of emails per day. And you want to make sure that one, your email stands out, and two, you make it as easy as possible for your manager or supervisor to do what you need them to do as quickly and easily as possible. It will make your life easier. It'll make your manager's life easier. And hopefully will result in less screen time for all of you, which is always a good thing these days.
Meg, a comment in the chat. Yuan said one of the reasons for this is to be successful in the job search. So that was going back to your question about why. And then there's a really great comic that Daga posted. So if you have a chance to take a look at that, it's showing kind of that importance of or the difference in.
PhD. I'm definitely going to have to check that out. Thank you for the recommendation. Appreciate that. Oh, I'm really tempted to click on it right now, but I'm gonna pause for a second. So again, feel free to throw this in the chat over the course of the presentation, but curious to hear your current techniques and tricks when you write to someone in a professional setting, whether that's a supervisor, a manager, or a colleague. We can keep monitoring here too. We'll keep an eye on your ideas and best practices. In the meantime, I want to share this kind of 6-step hexagonal framework to effective emails. If you want to use the sides of the hexagon, if you want to use the points, completely up to you. But I really find this shape to be helpful in my own process for remembering the 6 points to really think about when drafting and then ultimately sending an email. This is an important note before we launch into this framework and play around with it a little bit. I'm not here to tell you that you need to completely change the way you communicate over email. I do believe that authenticity and professionalism, it's not a false dichotomy. You can still, bring your own voice and your own intonations into emails. However, again, thinking back to our earlier conversation about why netiquette is so important, there are certain rules of thumbs and tips and tricks that can help your email and your professional written communications just be that more impactful. So again, I don't want to push a model without that's blind to who you are and what your own unique communication style. But I do want to encourage you to try out elements of this that feel relevant and easy to incorporate into your own professional practice and your own job search. I do believe you can keep your authentic voice as a writer and follow some basic principles that will ensure your message gets across clearly, respectfully, and professionally. So just a little disclaimer there. We'll dive right in. So 6 sides to effective emails. Arguably the most important side to me is reflecting. And often it's the most important and also the most overlooked part of professional written communications. But taking a moment, particularly when you're sending an email to a colleague that you might not interact with frequently, or to your manager or supervisor, asking yourself really intentionally before writing, is email the best medium for my message? There's a couple situations where emails are just not suited and are not effective. If there's a lot of back and forth that needs to happen, a lot of dialogue, if there's a lot of emotion on the table, or if you're making a slightly complicated and ambiguous request. In these situations, it's so much easier on your end and on your colleague, your counterpart's end, to either request a time to meet and offer up your available times, pick up the phone and call that individual, Or particularly for these emotionally charged dialogues, my supervisor, Dr. Colin Terry, and I were talking about the do not send email folder, where if you're feeling just particularly riled up by something that happened and you'd really like to just express yourself vociferously over email, draft it, but don't send it. Put it in a folder, return to it 24 hours later, 48 hours later, once you've had an opportunity to step back, get a little perspective. There could still be some really useful nuggets in there, but just practicing that kind of self-restraint that, you know what, I'm feeling really emotionally charged about what's going on here. I'm going to jot down my thoughts, but my message is too charged and ambiguous to be effectively communicated over email. And again, in professional settings, we want to remember the Freedom of Information Act. I love this t-shirt, and it's really well suited with so many PhD candidates in the room. I imagine many of you have fielded emails from students where the answer is easily viewable in the syllabus. I think this is also something that holds true for professional settings. The catch being here, if you've got a simple question, make sure you do some legwork to make sure that the answer to your question isn't in the new intern handbook, isn't easily accessible on the company's website. Again, just keeping kind of that first impression in mind. You want to make sure that you're presenting yourself as someone that is thorough, does their homework, no pun intended there, and has a resourcefulness before asking the questions. Not to say that questions are poor, but thinking through kind of, okay, is this information easily on hand for me? A great comic that illustrates a little bit how complicated asks just don't translate as well over email. Again, that's a situation where you want to pick up the phone. And something that seems really simple to you might be really complicated and complex for your coworker. So that's, again, something as you ask yourself, okay, is email the best medium for this? You want to really place yourself intentionally in your recipient's shoes and think about, okay, if they're receiving this quite complicated electrophoresis explanation, are they going to understand it? Is my message really going to get across? Or is it something where I need to sit down with them one-on-one and use my many resources to explain the concept? There's a really interesting psych experiment about the curse of knowledge that we can talk about another time. But again, so kind of in summary for this first point of the hexagon, ask yourself, take a minute to really intentionally pause before your emails in professional settings and just kind of openly, non-judgmentally ask, is email the best medium for my message? Can I find the answer to my question in an existing resource? What do I need my reader to understand? And am I trying to convey something complicated? Because if things are complicated, an in-person or Zoom meeting might be a little easier. I'm going to pause there for a second. Any questions, thoughts coming up? Someone's noting Grammarly as a great resource for the tone of their emails. I think that can be a great way to just get another perspective on your message that's really effective. Absolutely. Okay, well, again, if any questions pop up, feel free to raise your hand, throw something in the chat. We'll keep monitoring. Subject lines, get the short end of the stick, but they are, again, if you think about your future manager, your future supervisor, and you have hundreds of emails flooding your email inbox every day, subject lines really determine whether I'm going to open that right away or scan down and continue on my merry way. So when you think about subject lines, I want you to think of a newspaper headline. A newspaper headline is clear, it's concise, it effectively summarizes the email's contents, it's fairly specific, and it's actionable. If you're making a request, it's easy to act on that request. It's kind of with that in mind, curious how you guys would transform these subject lines. Again, update, meeting, hi, job interest. I will say these are all subject lines that I have seen in my own life, and I have seen previous students send. So quite real there. So update, again, thinking about making something clear, specific. We would include some relevant details there. Update on the Golden City solar panel project. Meeting, a meeting would now include the date and the time to refresh the recipient's memory of, oh, okay, that's what's going on here. Hi might be transformed into an introduction with your name, particularly when you think about networking, putting your kind of your name and your purpose behind it right in the subject line is huge. And the same holds true for job interest. Putting kind of the position that you are immediately interested in right in that subject line along with your name. A little more practice that we can return to at the end of the presentation if we have time. And I will also share out these slides at the end of the presentation if you want to practice on your own. I really encourage you to engage with these very real world situations and think about how you would distill your message into something that is brief, clear, and kind of grabs your reader's attention. So right next to the subject line is the CC and the BCC. The CC line stands for carbon copy. BCC means blind carbon copy. And if you include someone on a blind carbon copy, the recipient does not see that name under the blind carbon copy, doesn't appear. Again, this is where kind of your audience and whatever organization you're working with, that culture is really going to determine how CCs are used. I will say, very generally speaking, they're used to keep people in the loop, which is really well-intentioned. You want everyone to be on the same page. But again, remembering that many people are just overwhelmed with emails, and people may not read emails that are not directly addressed to them. So kind of thinking through, again, the context of your organization is really salient and vital here. But one option that I found that I really enjoy is that instead of CCing, you could cut the information from your original email and paste it into a new personalized message for that recipient, which increases the odds that they'll open your email and helps kind of reduce some of that misinterpretation risk of, was this addressed to me? Was this not addressed to me? Just again, helping with the clarity. So that's subject lines and a little tangent down CC lane. Openings are really, really important as well. Particularly when you think about entering a new professional setting, a new organization, I really encourage you to address your emails like a formal business letter. As you develop relationships at your organization, you can adopt a more casual tone, get a sense for how others in your organization address their emails. But when you're new, when you're just starting off, a more formal tone communicates your professionalism and your commitment to taking this role seriously and taking all elements of your role seriously. So openings set the tone for your message. I encourage you always include a salutation, opt for dear or hello over hey. Again, at least initially when you're getting a sense of how the company's culture operates. Use titles appropriately and respectfully. For many, particularly undergraduates in the room, please use professor or doctor when addressing your professors, and that may hold true for professional settings as well. Opt for Ms. over Mrs. or Miss. And do a little bit of background research. If you're not sure if the individual that you're communicating with outside of your organization obtained their PhD, do a quick LinkedIn search and see if they do use doctor or if that's part of their professional identity. Again, that just communicates such respect for your recipient. Spell check. I know this sounds like incredibly self-evident, but there are so many times when people accidentally misspell names. And again, that's something that right from the get-go, if you read an email where your name is misspelled, you read that email differently. So just being really, really careful that you spell the individual's name correctly is vital. Something you will see in my emails frequently is a line that recognizes your common humanity. And I think it's just a really nice way to kind of set a personable, friendly tone for your email, and kind of acknowledges as well that your colleagues have lives outside of the professional workplace. 2 examples of what that might look like. So some real world examples. This is an opening from a student. Hey, do we have class today since it's snowing? I think there's some room for improvement here. Reframe. Dear Professor Terry, I hope you enjoyed your weekend. Can you please confirm if we have class today? Again, setting a radically different, as Professor Terry's receiving this, he's got a much different mental framework about the students' professionalism in the class, but also just their ability to communicate respectfully with others. Hey, Mrs. Locke, dear Mrs. Locke, dear Ms. Locke, always check the spelling, opt for the Ms. So that's greetings. I know I'm moving pretty quickly here. Any questions that are coming up for folks? We're halfway through the framework. We're doing great. Halfway around the hexagon.
Meg,
Yes.
comment in the chat, reread for missing words. So spell
And
check,
reread for missing words.
I do that sometimes.
It's really, actually, Colin is highlighting the 6th step of the hexagon too, a little foreshadowing, which is fantastic, but missing words all the time. So the 4th thing we're going to talk about is content and tone. And someone was kind of alluding to this earlier when they talked about using Grammarly to proofread their emails, which can be a great tool in your back pocket. But I think there's a couple human tips and techniques that hold true that you can also apply when you think about the body of your email. Again, thinking back to your reader's perspective, you want to think about, okay, what does this reader know about the problem at hand, the project at hand, the situation at hand? And really consider, how this is going to read from their vantage point. I encourage you to put your main point or request or question at the beginning of your email. Don't bury it down. So something could look like, Dear Wendy, hope you're well. I've got a question for you about the upcoming VIP program. Putting it right there at the beginning. Try to stick to one main point per email. I know, again, we talk about just the volume of email. You want to reduce that volume. But an email with multiple different points can feel pretty overwhelming to the reader. So think about trying to kind of distill your asks to one main question. If you've got multiple questions, you can send more than one email and have your subject line match the content so that it's really easy for your reader to get a sense of what you're talking about in each one. State your request clearly. I know there can be this temptation to kind of couch particularly difficult requests in flowery language, kind of indirect words. Resist that temptation. Be direct, be clear, but also be respectful. Use please, use thank you. Do the things that your parents or guardians raised you to do over email. And again, thinking back to the it's in the syllabus question, make sure you do your legwork beforehand, whether that's looking at your colleague's calendar before to propose meeting times that are mutually beneficial for the two of you, or doing a little research on, whatever policy your project holds. Again, the goal here is to make it as easy as possible for others to respond and help you quickly. And that can include adding times that you're available to meet. I think I saw a question pop up in the chat here. What have we got going on? In greeting, how to make sure to choose between Mrs., Miss, or name directly? That's a great question. So generally, if you're addressing someone, and Doandy, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Please tell me if I'm not. Generally, if someone identifies as a female and you know they identify as a female, you can always use Ms., MS. And I would encourage that to be MS with the last name. So if I was going to do it for myself, my name is Meg Allen. I would be Ms. Allen. And that just kind of rolls off the tongue. Again, as you start to get to know your organization, you may start to use first names, but when you're making immediate impressions during the job search, networking, and during your first few weeks in an organization, use Ms. and the last name with female colleagues. I hope that's helpful. And Colin's point is right on. Always offering a meeting as an alternative response if the email is more nuanced or complex. Kind of hearkening back to the beginning of the hexagon, asking yourself, is email the best medium for whatever question or request that I have top of mind here. Aim for a respectful and considerate tone throughout your email. Again, this sounds really self-evident, but you would be so surprised how many emails, and I'm sure you all have experiences with this, whether that's at Minds or in your various internships, where tone is something that's not considered and it really affects the email exchange and the person that you're having the email exchange with. So if you can be respectful and considerate using those please, those thank yous, inviting your colleagues' input is huge, using phrases like, I welcome your feedback. Please inform me if I misunderstood this detail. And actually, someone mentioned this at the beginning of the presentation, and I'm glad they brought it up. Negative tones don't translate well over email. So even if you're a really sarcastic human, sarcasm is wonderful. I love Seinfeld. I miss it terribly. But I would encourage you to save that for the in-person, the face-to-face. It just doesn't translate nearly as effectively over written communication. So a couple opportunities here to practice tone. We could transform the let me know if you don't understand into please let me know if I can explain any of this information further. Something that's a little more respectful, offers the opportunity for them to voice their questions in a way that's a little more accessible. And we could transform, I look forward to completing this matter into, I look forward to completing this project with your assistance. Acknowledges the fact that this is a team and it takes both of you. It's not just plowing ahead with your own vision. Send it to me as soon as you can. Kind of a hard tone there, like, whew, makes me feel like I need to stay up till midnight. Rephrasing that into, I know this is a busy time of year for this department, but I'd appreciate it if you would send it to me as soon as you can. Kind of implicit in all of this is just an acknowledgement that there's another human being receiving your email, and you want to be attentive to their emotional lives when you think about writing emails. Just looking at this screen stresses me out, I'll be honest. This is a little overwhelming. So, great illustration of this principle of chunking. 1 to 2 sentences in each chunk makes it so much more readable and accessible from your recipient's perspective. So when you think about formatting, chunk that information into small paragraphs or use bullets if that's appropriate, and something that takes place in your organization. No more than 2 to 3 sentences per paragraph. Try to keep messages concise. Aim for 1 screen in length. So if you think about someone either reading your email over their phone, via their phone or on their laptop, try to keep it to about 1 screen in length there. So that's content and tone. We're going to talk about closings, and then we're going to talk about proofreading, and then we'll dive into some practice. Closings. Closings are really, really vital. Especially as an entry-level employee, I encourage you to really be intentional with your thank yous during your closing. Always express gratitude. I'd also encourage you to indicate your willingness to keep the conversation going, whether that's extending the help, offering to pick up the phone and talk further. That just, to the reader, suggests that you are ready to do whatever it takes to get this project done and to be helpful be helpful as a new employee. Something that's also quite frequent, and many of you probably might have this already, but I think it's worth mentioning, include an email signature with your relevant details. So your own personal email address, your phone number at work, maybe links to your team's webpage or your company's website. This just makes it easier for recipients, particularly outside of your organization, to follow up with you and to make it really easy. Again, goal is to just make it as easy as possible as we can for the recipient to take action. So this is an example email signature for a current Mind student. PhD candidates might have a slightly different format, but we've got the name, intended major, maybe a leadership position that you have on campus, and then your collegiate affiliation and intended graduation year. You could also include, Katie could also include a cell phone number if she felt that was appropriate, and her Mind's email address in there as well. Closings often include attachments. Always tell your readers when you attach a file to your email. Again, sounds very straightforward and self-evident, but many times we don't call it out and the recipient fails to read the file in your email, which again can just lead to a lot of confusion and unnecessary misinterpretation. So tell them that you've attached a file, tell them what the attachment is about, and if they need to do anything with it, if they need to offer feedback, if you'd like them to offer feedback, if they just need to scan through it. If the attachment's really long and complex, consider summarizing it briefly in the bottom of the body of the email. And then also, again, offering, as we talked about, to pick up the phone, meet in person, and talk about it face-to-face. Last step of the 6-sided process here, proofreading. And it deserves its all capital letters. Proofreading is quite literally everything. There's kind of the nuts and bolts of checking for grammatical errors, spelling, thinking about the readability of our message. Are we just pasting one gigantic paragraph, or are we really intentionally spacing things out so it's really easy and accessible on the eyes? Ensure the email address is spelled correctly. It's going to the intended recipient. Again, like so many times we just forget a period or add an extra letter E and our email address doesn't end up going to the person we need it to go to. Something that I do frequently is I read aloud my emails, both to check for those grammatical errors, but also to get a sense of what it sounds like. Does my email sound considerate, respectful, and actionable? Is my message clear enough that my grandmother would understand it? And if it's not, I consider picking up the phone or offering times to meet in person. Also in here is, and I'm a very big proponent of this, is get a friend or colleague to proofread an email, particularly if it's an email that you're a little nervous about sending. Maybe you're emailing a supervisor or a manager. Just getting an extra set of eyes on the message can be really, really helpful. I'm sure many of you do that already, but I thought I would re-emphasize the point here. Okay, we covered 6 steps today, team. We talked about reflecting about whether email is the best medium for our message at the beginning. If it is the best medium for our message, we talked about developing clear and concise subject lines that read like newspaper headlines. We talked about appropriate openings and using words like dear versus hey, including lines that kind of politely acknowledge the fact that our recipient has other things going on outside of work. We talked about content and tone, aiming for that considerate and respectful tone. We talked about chunking out our emails so that they're really readable on the eyes. We talked about effective closings and attachments, and we talked about proofreading. Putting it all together, I think this is a pretty stellar email template for a student that is trying to professionally network. You'll see that the subject line is very clear about what this student is trying to accomplish and quite actionable in that it's opening a conversation about cybersecurity opportunities. Dear Ms. Last Name, spelled correctly. This is a polite acknowledgement of our shared humanity. You wouldn't actually use that sentence, just to be clear, but you know, a riff on that. This sentence tells you who I am, a first-year student at the Colorado School of Mines. This sentence tells you how I got connected to you. I found your name and contact information on Mind's StickerNet platform. I would love to speak with you sometime to learn more about your experiences in the cybersecurity field. Please let me know if you would be open to an informational conversation over the phone or Zoom. I'm available on this date, and this date at this time. Thank you in advance for your time, and I look forward to connecting with you soon. In terms of closings, I see things like best wishes, I see sincerely, I see best regards. I think anything that communicates a certain professionalism is fair game. You wouldn't want to sign off with like, see you later, when you're initiating a relationship in this instance. But whether you use best wishes, whether you use sincerely, I think both are equally weighty and valid. So a couple things to keep in mind here. Don't expect an instant response. And maybe you've had this experience already in your email exchanges with team members, classmates, even professors. The 150 emails per day reflects the average number of emails that an academic chair at a college or university receives per day. So, and that's pretty true for people who head up companies, people who are responsible for large teams at organizations. They have a lot of emails. So because there may be a delay, you kind of want to work backwards and think, okay, if this project is due on Friday and I wanted to get some additional information about the project, I should really be emailing my manager on Monday or Tuesday to give them time to think about my email, respond to my email, and I can follow up for any last questions. An appropriate time to follow up is pretty context dependent. Again, it's going to depend on your audience, who your recipient is, the cultural norms at your organization, and quite frankly, the broader political and social climate. If there's a lot happening at your state or on the national level, people might be weighed down. I mean, this past year has really been a lesson in that for many, many of us. Generally, I say between 48 and 72 hours. Again, and in that follow-up, thinking through your tone about a careful, considerate, and respectful tone. I generally think that that's a good rule of thumb. And again, just thinking how our audience is so, so important here.